After a short drive down hilly roads, away from the congested downtown and the bustling shops, Mark turned into his neighbourhood. The cars lining each side of the street were parked like sentinels. The car ride was as quiet as the street in front of Mark's home. Johnny hadn't said a word. They walked into their home. Johnny stopped, stood still for a moment, and began to cry.
You're okay now, shh. You're all right. Damien can't hurt you anymore.
Those vampires have no chill. I peed myself and now I'm crying. I'm so weak.
Cry all you want. It's normal after something like that. What did that jerk say to you back there?
I just bought a Coke when I saw them. They called me over and asked if I was a friend of yours. I said yes, and then they asked if I was your donor. What are donors?
Mark shuffled his feet.
It's what we call people we regularly drink from.
I thought so. You bite away from home. I always hoped that you were not hurting anybody, and were just picking up girls like you did the night we met.
If the Society's donors are out of town, yes. That's what I always do for blood. I don't go around hunting humans.
The boy hunched over as though he tried to make himself smaller where he stood.
That bastard. Shit! I can't believe he'd suggest I'd make you my Tyro. What was he thinking?
He'd stopped crying. His face was a pathetic mix of fear and hopelessness.
Is it true?
I won't change you. We made a promise, didn't we? I'll always keep it.
You never talk about how you became a vampire. What about what that creep said earlier? Does it hurt?
Mark ran his hands through his hair and sighed. Why did this question come up now? It was bad enough now that Damien noticed the kid. He hoped Johnny wasn't considering to become a vampire. If so, everything the society feared would come true. A vampire life isn't right for a tween. Johnny should never hope to become like him. He was good, and Mark wanted him to have a normal life. Well, as normal of a life someone could have while being raised by a vampire.
It hurts to get bitten, but that's physical pain. Normally, people enjoy it when we drink them and don't even notice. Afterwards, our bites quickly heal. Think it's something in the saliva. However, changing is different. It's very hard. When I first drank vampire blood, I felt the worst despair. Then, I was very nauseous for a long while. I thought I was dying. Sometimes I wonder if I've lost my soul when I changed. I can't explain it, but it felt like there was something spiritual ripped from me.
That doesn't sound nice.
Believe me, it's not. Are you really okay? I don't care if he's a vampire or from the House of Skulls. If anyone tries anything like that again, I'll rip their teeth out.
I think I'm going to take a shower and go to sleep. It's been a long night.
That's an understatement.
And next time we see a show, let's pick somewhere where the skulls don't creep around.
Mark hit a wince.
You got it, kid.
Mark answered the phone. It was Mickelson's loudly worried voice. He asked for more details. How Johnny was. How Mark was. Mark explained how Damien threatened the boy and how his ward pissed his pants. Mickelson hissed on the other end of the phone line.
I can't believe that. Why would he say something like that to the boy?
Nobody knows what that guy is thinking. He's not exactly on the sane side.
You picked the worst guy to fight with, Mark. He's vengeful.
I know, Professor. I know.
Mickelson paused. He slowly breathed on the other side of the line before he spoke again.
Now, Tyro, I'm going to speak to you as the enforcer. According to the code, if a vampire harms another and it's not in self-defense or in defense of a human, then blood must be repaid with blood. I'm sorry, but you're obligated to go to the House of Skulls and ask their forgiveness.
He was scaring the piss out of the kid. What was I supposed to do?
It's a legal gray area, and I do not want it to be said that I ignore the wrongdoings of my apprentice. You'll go, and meet with them, and make peace. That is an order.
I understand, sir.
He wanted to hit Damien again. It chafed Mark. Humility was not one of his strongest points, but there was nothing to be done. The House of Skulls were like vampire neighbours. Mark sneered before entering their establishment. He had to come. While the kid had been scared, there was no sense of blood from Johnny. Mark had just reacted. Like it or not, Mark had to make peace. It was Zhenshu who greeted him.
He's waiting for you. Mickelson called to let us know you'd be stopping by.
Nate and Kyle are still hanging out with the Skulls. With slightly hollow, pale faces, they looked underfed. Thankfully, they were obviously still human. But that didn't seem to make much difference. Their clammy skin didn't have much colour than their vampire masters. Mark wondered if Damien would risk breaking the code again to make them vampires. The twins gave a small wave to Mark and followed the vampires. Mark descended into the basement.
All this talk of making peace from the Enforcer. Fine, I'll give him what he wants. You're a scapegoat after all.
Stepping away from the wall where he leaned, Damien walked slowly towards Mark while rounding his hand into a fist. He leaned back and his fist came at Mark's face. Closing his eyes, Mark hesitated for the impact. Nothing happened. When he opened them, he saw that Damien's fist was right in front of his forehead. Slowly, he tapped Mark's face with his knuckles.
Now we're even. As if I would play by the Enforcer's rules. Who does he think he is anyways? I'm glad you finally decided to visit us. Felt like you've been snubbing my family.
I can't believe you closed your eyes. You didn't think that he'd beat you up, did you?
The thought crossed my mind.
Nah, I'm not as cruel as my creator. I know that you're pretty pissed off, but you should trust me more. So, what's up with the boy? I thought vampires couldn't make kids. Or did you find a way to do it?
Red rose up Mark's neck. Zhenshu giggled.
Johnny's not my kid, but in a way, I've adopted him.
Johnny's his name, huh? Is it charity for blood? You never told me you found a young donor. I bet his blood is the best. You should invite us over sometime to share.
Nate and Kyle frowned.
He's not my donor. I'm not going to hand him over to any vampire to taste, sip, or bite. He's not a meal.
He's not your donor. You still don't want to drink friends? I thought you finally got over that during your introduction ball.
I guess my habits never change.
What about Kyle or Nate? Don't you want their blood? I bet you're thirsty.
Mark's throat went dry. No, I can't drink.
No, I'll pass.
That boy also said he's not your donor. Why isn't he? Is he too young? It's hard finding willing donors. Unless you're us, of course. Being quasi in the light helps hide us. When we act to our instincts, people don't mind it as much.
Mark shook his head.
Oh, I get it. You're taking him in because you can't have a son. Training him to be your Tyro when he's still young. That's brilliant. Why haven't I thought of that? He hasn't lived long enough as a human to know differently.
The twin shifted uncomfortably with his words.
It's weird for a vampire to be so close to a human day after day and not bite him. I can't believe that. It's unnatural.
No, we're the ones who are unnatural. You guys all have the wrong idea. First, you don't think raising a teenager to be a vampire is a bad idea. I mean, I didn't know what to do with my life when I was 13. How can anyone ask someone that young to be a vampire? Secondly, Johnny will never be my Tyro. Ever. If I could become a human again, I would. I wouldn't ask him to share this life.
Stunned, Damien stood quietly for a while. Then a look of horror crossed his face. Grabbing Mark's arm, he asked,
What did you just say? Are you actually serious?
About what?
Mark took a half step back. He'd never seen Damien so desperate. It was a whole new level of scary.
About wanting to be human. About wanting to die.
I don't want to die. I just want to live the rest of my life as a normal man.
If you're human, you'll die. There are few of us as it is. You've been given a gift. A gift! We live long. We're like immortals. We're demigods. We're not losers.
I don't think so. We're no better than humans. Vampires can still die. Yes, it's hard to die, but accidents happen. What's the point of living a longer life if you don't even know if you risk your soul?
That's the reason you want to become human. Souls? And here I'd hoped you fell in love with some hot woman or something. Of course, if you did, you could just change her like I did Shenshu.
You had to do some convincing that we'd be okay as vampires. We learned as we went.
Look, Mark, why don't you spend some time with us and get away from the kid and the professor? Getting attached to humans only gets you hurt when they croak. Hang out with us, and remember what it means to be a vampire. It's normal to bite the human next to you. Hell, we can even go on an old-fashioned hunt if that's what you need to feel alive. You really feel power when you chase them down and they beg. Just drop the idea of wanting to be human again.
Mark shivered at the word hunt. He no doubt that Damien would hunt people if that's what Mark wanted to do.
And what about us? Would you feel hurt if we croaked?
Yes, Bloodbag. I might just miss you guys.
The vampire rolled his eyes.
Just come visit. We'll be here. We always are.
I'm sorry that Damien scared the kid, but he's right. Our world is different.
Your world or us vampires' world? Because where I'm sitting, you'll never be more than food to those two.
You're wrong.
No, brother. I'm starting to think he's right. But Mark, you're not a member of the House of Skulls. We are, even if we're only donors. And I agree with Damien. I don't like how little you think of the gift you've been given. At least you have immortality. Be thankful and stop acting like an ass. If you really want that teenager to be a vampire, you shouldn't wait around. Don't let him end up like us.
Mark wondered when his old college friends began to think of themselves as separate from humans. For that matter, separate from Mark. After Mark left them, he didn't see the twins or the House of Skulls again that year. Mark needed a vacation, and the vampire artists he traded with agreed. After all, they'd been working for a decade without a real vacation. They knew that the Society of the Arts hibernated every century, and they were surprised that the society had gone underground sooner. But Mark knew why. He was the new vampire. He had to be trained, and then suddenly he adopted an orphan without consulting them. No wonder why they were upset. They probably were worried people would notice their timelessness. Mark had thrown their plans for a loop. Mark needed to speak with the professor and learn his history before they hibernated. Johnny was now an adult. It was time. It was a cool spring day in early May when Mark visited Belmonte's mansion. He leaned back with his feet up against Belmonte's recliner while Charlie sat beside him as he whittled reeds for his woodwinds. His face frowned with each exact stroke. Belmonte absorbed himself painting nearby.
Damien mentioned something about hibernation. Is it true that the society goes to sleep for a few decades?
Yeah, 40 years actually. I do it too, but President Belmonte refuses to hibernate with the others. Last time he woke up, the internet was invented. He thinks things are moving too quickly in the modern world. If he stays awake, so do I. He gets too broody by himself. He needs someone to keep him on his toes.
More like make him worry. You're always out to some new event around town.
And don't you know it? We're forever to have fun, so why not use that time to enjoy life?
Professor Mickelson came into the room with a newspaper folded underneath his arm. Sitting down beside Mark, Mickelson opened the paper and began to read. While still looking at the printed text, he spoke.
You'll still have many lifetimes to do whatever you want, Mark. Well, gentlemen, I will miss having a newspaper with pages you can turn and ink you can smell. By the time we wake up from hibernation, this will be gone, and probably our news will come through some handheld device.
It already does, Professor.
Yes, but there might be a time when people also stop printing books. The world is always changing. Just think, Tyro. You'll be there to witness it all. I need you to experience hibernation. It is an important skill we need. It saved my progenitor's life once.
You never speak about him. Will you finally tell me how you met?
President Belmonte walked into the room with paint smudges on his hands.
I think I also want to hear you tell the story.
You already know how we met.
I know. I want to hear it again. It's been a long time since you last spoke of it. Your Tyro deserves to know his heritage. Why don't you start from the beginning?
He leaned back on one wall and waited. Mickelson stared at him, but it was obvious that the society president had no intention to budge.
You're right. But what's there to say? It's not a happy history when I'm the only one left in my bloodline. Well, now there are two alive.
He stared at Mark, and Mark remembered Damien's warning. Mickelson had drunk vampire blood before. What kind of family history would Mark have if his progenitor killed his own father?
I was born in Massachusetts in 1842.
Is Steve Mickelson your real name?
Actually, my real name is Stefan. I've always gone by variations of my real name like Stevie or Steve, like I use now. I was born in a Massachusetts merchant family in 1842. In 1859, my father sent me to study at Oxford in England. Unfortunately, during my college years, the United States fell into civil war. Being in England, I'd missed the draft. While other Union sons served the country with honor, my father, not wanting me to return home, decided to serve instead. He died during the last year of the war. I've always regretted that. In Oxford, I'd met other American students. What I didn't know was that the Southern gentry had a strong tradition of sending their sons overseas to be educated. At first, we didn't get along. The war was in everyone's mind, but eventually, my classmates and I made peace. My Dixie classmates believed that the Southern states had the constitutional right to separate from the Union. Even though we disagreed, eventually we became the best of friends. Those boys and I had some good times. I studied archaeology and languages. Ancient Greece was always my favorite topic, like it's today. I suppose my father always knew that I was cut out more to be an academic than a merchant, or especially a soldier. After I'd gotten my doctorate, I was a rising star in the department. After many publications, I managed to secure a grant from a museum to join an archaeology team in northern Greece. The trip was a success, and my team brought back many artifacts. I returned via train, and one of our stops was Paris. My team and I had decided to disembark on the train and enjoy the town for a few days before leaving for England. On our second day in France, I sat at an outdoor cafe enjoying a fine coffee, and I recognized a man passing by. He was a former classmate of mine, a native of the area, named Vildu. He told me that he was starting a new archaeological dig outside an old small village. When he said that he was short-handed, I quickly offered to help. He accepted, and the next day I said goodbye to my former team and left for the village. I planned to only spend that summer. Vildu and I spent a few weeks excavating the remains of a village. Its residents had mysteriously disappeared during the Dark Ages. I was curious to see what he would find, but we found a few walls and pots, but nothing impressive. I was ready to give up when I accidentally tripped over a wall which we'd overlooked. It belonged to what appeared to be the largest house in the site. Based on the evidence, we knew that the house had once belonged to a minor nobility, a knight. Vildu and I were convinced that we'd be able to find something valuable. We dug out the house, and what we found shocked us. The outer doors of the house had been sealed with large stones, and beneath it the house was boarded and mortared up with crosses embedded in the walls. Vildu and I assumed behind those stones were the bodies of people who died from the plague. That was a logical reason why we would have seen a place enclosed during those days. Thinking as we did, we should have never been so curious. We should have left the dead to lay in peace. It was against my judgment as we pulled away the stone. Finally, enough space for us to comfortably duck into the dark house. We brought our oil lamps and began to look inside the dark space. I still remember how thin and stale the air was. There was a corpse in the house. It was about a 40-year-old man, completely preserved and wearing fine clothing for his day. I was distracted by an intersecting hall while Vildu dusted the corpse off. We didn't know what he found. The corpse became alive. He bit into Vildu's neck and tore my friend's main artery. He killed him. I didn't even know my friend was dead. I was so absorbed in walking the halls of the old house that I didn't sense the danger around me. I was grabbed from behind. That was my first time seeing a vampire in bloodlust. It was horrible. He bit deep into my shoulder. As he drank from me, I was so filled with terror I couldn't feel any joy or hope, only fear. I was weak back then and I couldn't shake him off as he dragged me back to the room where Vildu lay. I cried when I saw my friend dead and realized it was equally hopeless for me as well. It was then, when my tears hit his face, that he snapped out of his hysteria. He leaped away from me and began to apologize to me in Old French. When he saw my colleague, he began to pace between us. I was too frightened and weak to move. I pressed my hand against my body to stop the bleeding. I didn't need to. Vampire bites naturally close, but I didn't know that. I was confused. This monster drank from me and I had lost too much blood. I made no guess that I'd been attacked by a vampire at the time. The only thing I was thinking was that I wished to live. I collapsed in that dusty tomb. That's what it was, Mark, a tomb. The villagers had discovered their local aristocracy, a knight, was a vampire. They buried him alive in his own house. They kept him locked up by placing crucifixes completely around the building. Vildu and I were fools to poke around a vampire's grave. The knight's name was Sir Andre Garnier. Stuck in that desolate place, Sir Garnier hibernated there, waiting for God knows when someone would find him. He eventually lost hope and fell into the deepest slumber. That's how he survived. Vampires, I later learned, were not meant to sleep for centuries at a time. A few decades, yes, but hibernating is what kept him alive. We were the first visitors he'd had after centuries. He didn't want to kill his rescuers. When Sir Garnier realized that he had killed my friend, he was determined to save me. Before I knew it, Sir Garnier forced me to drink his blood. I still remember its disgusting taste. Ever since that moment, I became his Tyro, his apprentice. In his mind, that is repentance for taking my friend's life. But in his day, progenitors owned their Tyros. We had a more master and apprentice relationship. He taught me to kill other vampires. He taught me the code. He taught me how to hunt and to hide. He taught me how to fight. The kind of life of fighting that my poor father never wanted for me. But I became good at it.
Charlie rubbed his arms.
When he awoke, he had a hard time in the modern world. His language was obsolete. He didn't understand that his noble title had no worth after the French Revolution. He couldn't comprehend how steam engines worked. He called them witchcraft. And forget about that, there were continents and a land called the New World. He was a man completely out of touch with the current times. Eventually, he came with me to America. It was in New York that we met Belmonte.
In the United States, we were surprised to meet such an old vampire. Although we can live an exceptionally long time, so many of us die by accidents or some other fate. He introduced himself as an enforcer of the code. Sure, the oldest among us have heard of enforcers, myself included, but they are rare. Most die before they can pass along the position to another. It was clear that as his Tyro, Steve would succeed him. After a few messages, the leaders of the vampire communities accepted him into that role for Colorado and all the Middle States. It only made sense. Our region of the United States didn't have an active enforcer. No one wants to be the one saddled without a vampire community, having to travel alone and enact a strict code of justice. That role reminds too many of us of our mortality. You'd have never have guessed that Steve was the Tyro of such a quiet vampire. The old vampire had no life to him. His eyes were dead. I suppose that would happen to anyone after spending hundreds of years in isolation. Anyone would go insane. Luckily, I spoke a version of his dialect that was a few centuries later. He cried when I first spoke his provincial French. Besides Steve, no one knew how to speak with him. How could we? His dialect was from the 9th century. Charlie knew a few words here and there, but his French wasn't old enough. Sir Garnier never did open up to any of us.
It was only 10 years later that Sir Garnier asked me to make the hardest decision I'd have to make in my life. He asked me to drink from him. The idea was that when I did, some part of him, like a memory, would remain. It is a practice the older vampires used to do. Sir Garnier was determined to become human again. I couldn't disobey him. I'd no say. Being his Tyro was like being his page. He never quite treated me as an equal. I did as I was told.
Sir Garnier left us soon after Mickelson drank his blood. He'd found a way to become human, but he returned an old man. He said he'd saved his soul, then he died immortal.
What? There's actually a way to become human? How did he do it?
Why? Do you want to become human again?
Yes, I think I may have lost my soul choosing this path.
Only after we wake up and you see the new world will I ask this question again. If you still say yes, and that you hate being a vampire, I will tell you how to be reborn as a human again.
Why not tell me now?
Sir Garnier died. I don't want to risk you too. Vampires live forever. Only the most extreme circumstances could kill us. You're not dying anytime soon, so don't worry about things like that. Becoming human means that you'll eventually die. I don't want you to suffer. Please, give this life a chance.
It's fun to live life with a little bite.
As a vampire, you'll see worlds you could have never imagined.
Mark excused himself. He had much to think about. He found a cozy spot in the mansion's massive library and decided to take a nap. Mark dreamed of Sir Andre Garnier. His vampire ancestor rode on an armored horse, raising his sword in a charge to a foggy dawn field. Suddenly, he changed his direction towards Mark. Transfixed, Mark tried to move, but his feet wouldn't lift. The living tank was charging straight towards him. With a quick tug, the steed's reins were pulled and the racing horse stopped directly in front of Mark. The younger vampire's face was only inches away from a snorting horse's nose. His hair lifted up by the horse's snort of cold air. The knight's gloved hand raised the visor of his helmet. He had a wise but fierce face. Piercing dark eyes met Mark's. It startled Mark awake. Many worries filled his mind as he tried to sleep.
Dumb things on street. So many dumb things on street. Dumb